And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready for peace negotiations and an unconditional ceasefire to stop the more than 3-year war with Russia. Speaking at the G7 summit in Alberta, Mr. Zelensky says his country needs support from allies and thanked Canada for new funding that was announced on Tuesday. Prime Minister Mark Carney outlined $4.3 billion in new support for Ukraine's defense, with nearly half of the money going toward weapons. Canada will count this funding toward its NATO defense spending target of 2%. Earlier at the summit, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte praised Canada's decision to increase its defense spending. We were joined by our news director, David Clement, who has the latest.
Now, David, was the G7 a success for Volodymyr Zelensky?
Yeah, I think it was because for two main reasons. The first being he was able to successfully keep Russia's war against Ukraine front of mind for the decision makers and leaders who ultimately make these big funding decisions. They're the wealthiest countries in the world. These are the countries whom you need to have that relationship with if you're going to continue to require military aid. So he certainly accomplished that feat, which is not an easy task given what is going on right now between Iran and Israel. So he definitely checked that box. I also think it's a success because he walked out of it with a funding commitment from Canada, multiple billions of dollars. And the important distinction there is that most of it is for military equipment, which is really what the Ukrainians need as the war grinds on. Now, not a complete victory for him. There was a lot of discussion about the watering down of the statement from the G7 regarding Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We also know that Trump kind of alluded to the fact that Russia shouldn't have been kicked out of then the G8, which is not a particularly welcoming comment for the Ukrainians because Russia was removed from the G8, which made it the G7 after invading Crimea in 2014. Ironically, Trump did get a couple facts wrong. It wasn't Trudeau and Obama. It was actually Prime Minister Stephen Harper, as Chris Alexander alluded to earlier with us, that decision was made. So I wouldn't say it's a complete total victory, but it's certainly a job well done if you're looking to evaluate the Ukrainian president's walk away from the G7.
Now, you did mention this, but I want to dive into it a little bit more. Canada's funding announcement for Ukraine. What has been the reaction to this announcement?
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag because on one hand, I think a majority of Canadians do want to see Ukraine supported and do want the Ukrainians to win. Whatever that definition of win looks like, that's unclear. But on the other hand, we are talking about billions of dollars. And so there's been lots of commentary really on two fronts. The first is, can we afford it? The last federal budget was $60 billion in deficit. We don't have a federal budget now because the Carney government isn't producing one yet. And so the first major question is, can we afford it? How are we paying for it? Those are all legitimate concerns. You can obviously both want to support Ukraine while also wondering how the Canadian government is going to pay for something. But really, the second part, which I just alluded to, is that we don't have a budget. So we don't actually know where it falls, what line item it is. It's a promise right now, and it may very well be a promise that we fulfill, but we haven't seen the accounting for it yet.
Now, Mark Carney has announced that that Canada is going to focus more on defense spending and hitting those targets. So is there any debate as to whether or not this commitment to Ukraine should count as defense spending money?
Yeah, so the Carney government is planning on using it to count towards hitting that NATO threshold this year because that was the big shift. He made the announcement that that Canada is going to hit the NATO commitment this year rather than years from now. Which is a lofty goal, and it left a lot of people really wondering, well, how exactly are we going to do this in such a short time period? Nominally, in terms of the nuts and bolts, this would obviously help. It's over $4 billion. That's a pretty significant commitment. But there is some debate over whether or not it should be included in defense spending for two reasons. One, it's not equipment used in Canada. So it's not used by our military. It's not used for Canada's national defense. That doesn't undermine the need that Ukraine has, but it does raise some questions on the accounting of it. And two, it's going to a non-NATO member. Again, people may support it, but technically Ukraine is not in NATO. And so there are some questions being asked about whether or not this should be included in Canada reaching its NATO defense spending commitment.